Hey guys, tonight we drift far north to a forgotten fjord where the world smells of salt and pine and the nights stretch so long they feel half eternal. The sea lies calm under a silver moon, its surface smooth as beaten metal. Yet beneath that quiet surface the earth is not sleeping. Deep below the fjord, ancient stone plates grind together, sending slow shivers through the soil. Up above, a Viking village named Ligra stirs in the dark. Smoke rises from turf-roofed homes, pale threads twisting toward the stars. Dogs bark once, then fall silent. The old ones say the ground is breathing tonight. You listening from your warm bed probably wouldn't survive this story if you were there, so it's best to stay cozy right where you are. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there in your corner of the world. Now find yourself a cozy seat or a soft bed, let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The villagers of Ligra live at the edge of everything, where mountains meet the sea, and the sky spills its moods without warning. Their world smells of whale oil and pine pitch, and their days turn around tide's wind and superstition. Each house is framed with rough timber and packed with peat. Sheep bleat in pens of driftwood, and the air rings with the steady hammer of smiths at work. By the 9th century, small coastal communities like this have spread across western Norway, sustained by fishing trade, and a stubborn belief that the gods still walk in storms. A mainstream historical fact anchors our picture. The Viking Age settlements along Norway's fjords were built on marine terraces, flat shelves of sediment left behind by ancient glaciers. They're beautiful but unstable. When rain saturates the soil, those layers can liquefy, sliding toward the sea like wet dough. Engineers today call this process quick clay failure. Back then, of course, no one had the faintest idea why the ground sometimes decided to melt. They only knew that it could and did. Tonight, though, the villagers aren't thinking about clay. They're thinking about tomorrow's catch, about storing fish and repairing sails before winter locks the fjord in ice. Children chase one another through drifting fog, their laughter echoing off stone walls. The blacksmith Olan wipes his hands on his apron and swears he can hear thunder underground. His wife chuckles that he's just hearing his stomach after too much herring. Yet when she turns back toward the hearth, a fine crack has appeared across the packed earth floor. By the shoreline, a fisherman named Arvid notices something odd. The tide is lower than it should be. The boats sit crooked in the mud ropes, pulled tight, as if straining towards something unseen. He squats down, runs his fingers through the exposed sand, and feels warmth. Not the faint warmth of sun-baked earth, but a deeper heat like breath. The ground exhales faint sulphur, that sharp tang of something burning beneath water. He spits and mutters that Loki must be stirring in his pit again. A quirky tidbit tucked into northern folklore describes such nights as the earth's hunger, when land spirits grow restless and demand offerings. People would leave bowls of milk or beer outside their doors to placate the hidden folk. Some even whispered that if the gifts were refused, the land would reclaim what it had given. Modern folklorists find records of these traditions written centuries later, but they trace them back to older fears, ones born from real geological memory. In the main longhouse, elders gather by lamplight. They speak in low tones about the strange tremors that have rippled through the soil since the moon rose. A clay jug rolls gently across the table and settles upright again. No one laughs this time. The eldest man, Thorgeir, recalls stories from his grandfather about a valley to the east that sank like a loaf in an oven. Historians still argue whether those early sagas exaggerated natural disasters or encoded eyewitness events and oral record of quick clay collapses remembered as divine punishment. Whatever the truth, the parallels make everyone uncomfortable. Outside, the wind falls utterly still. Even the gulls seem to have vanished. The world has that strange pre-storm hush, the kind that makes your ears ring. A thin vibration hums through the wooden floorboards, too faint to notice unless you're very still. Inside one house, a cradle begins to sway on its own, creaking softly. The baby wakes, but instead of crying, it stares upward, eyes wide as dust sifts down like snow. At the edge of the village, an old woman named Brynja tends to her goats. She feels the first tremor before anyone else. It comes not as a shake, but as a sigh, a long exhale through the soles of her bare feet. She freezes listening. The ground beneath her pen lets out a faint pop like a cork from a bottle. Then, silence again. Brynja backs away, slowly whispering an old prayer. When she reaches her doorway, she looks back and notices that the wooden fence has sunk by the height of her hand. If you were standing there now, you might not feel much. The air would taste faintly metallic, a scent like rain on iron. The mist would cling to your eyelashes, turning torchlight into halos. Yet under that quiet, the clay is softening, losing its shape grain by grain. The fjord holds its breath. A single candle flickers out in the longhouse. Olin frowns, thinking it's just a draught, and relights it. The flame wavers, then stretches sideways, drawn toward the floor. A heartbeat later, another tremor rolls through the earth, stronger this time. Cups rattle, dogs bark. Someone laughs nervously, trying to make light of it. But outside, the goats have gone silent again. Later generations will dig in this place and find layers of distorted soil folded like dough. They'll debate whether an earthquake, a gas explosion, or a landslide caused the catastrophe. For now, though, Lygra sleeps half awake, unaware that its last sunrise is only a few hours away. And as the fog thickens, the wind rises once more, carrying the faint smell of sulphur and smoke. The earth grumbles low beneath the turf roofs, a sound too deep for human ears to name, and then stills again, as if pretending to rest. Somewhere beneath that trembling calm, the story is only beginning to move. The first light of morning crawls across the fjord, grey and uncertain. The mist lies heavy on the water, curling between the docks and timber huts like ghostly wool. Inside the longhouse, smoke from last night's hearth-fire still hangs low, turning the air blue and sluggish. Most of the villagers are still asleep, but one figure moves quietly through the haze, Inga the village seer. Her silver hair is braided with beads of bone and driftwood, her fingers stained from years of herbs and soot. She tends the hearth as she always does before dawn, muttering to herself in the old tongue. The fire is weak, its embers buried under a crust of ash. Inga leans close, blowing softly until the coals flare back to life. And that's when she sees it. The smoke doesn't rise straight up, but curls downward, coiling back into the pit like a serpent swallowing its tail. The sight freezes her breath. In her craft, smoke is supposed to climb to carry prayers toward the sky. When it turns downward, it means the sky has refused them. She watches the curling grey for a long time, then draws a line of soot across her forehead. The ground hungers, she whispers. A mainstream historical fact. Viking society believed deeply in omens drawn from nature, bird flight, weather, animal behaviour, even the shapes of smoke and flame. Archaeologists have found ritual bowls, burnt offerings and charms near many Norse homes, evidence of a culture that saw no barrier between the physical and the spiritual. A bad omen wasn't superstition, it was early risk management. When you live on the edge of the world, you take signs seriously. Inga pulls on her wool cloak and steps outside. The air is colder than it should be for late autumn, perhaps 5 degrees Celsius, about 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost feathers the grass, but the sky is strangely warm-hued, tinted amber at the edges as if sunrise has already begun beneath the horizon. Across the village, a handful of early risers tend to chores. Arvid the fisherman is hauling nets from the shallows, muttering that the catch feels wrong, too heavy, too still. When he drags the net onto the stones, several fish spill out slick and pale, their eyes clouded like glass. Dead before they were caught, he says quietly. The village dogs refuse to go near the shore. They stand on the ridges, whining softly, their ears twitching to sounds no human can hear. Inga notices all of it, the silent gulls, the thickened air, the taste of salt sharper than usual. She walks to the centre of the settlement, to the fire pit that serves as the village's hearth, and scatters crushed herbs into the embers juniper for clarity rowan for protection. The smoke rises, sluggishly heavy with resin, and as it twists she sees shapes forming hollows that look like mouths. There's a saying preserved in later Icelandic sagas, when the smoke eats its maker flee. Scholars still debate whether this line was literal advice or poetic metaphor. Some interpret it as instruction to leave when volcanic ash darkened the sky. Others believe it symbolised moral decay when one's own deeds turned against them. Either way, it survives in enough manuscripts to suggest a shared memory of natural disasters reframed as divine punishment. Inga doesn't need scholars to tell her what she feels. She walks door to door, warning the households in a calm but urgent tone. Move the animals to higher ground. Do not sleep on the low paths tonight. The earth stirs under us. Some obey instantly. After all, no one wants to risk angering unseen forces. Others laugh kindly, as they do every season when the old woman makes her predictions. One man jokes that if the ground opens, at least it will save them the trouble of digging new wells. Inga smiles tightly, but says nothing. By midday the fog has thinned, revealing more of the fjord. The tide seems wrong again, drawn outward, as if the sea itself is retreating. The exposed seabed gleams wet and pale, scattered with shells and stranded fish. Children wander down to poke at them with sticks, giggling until a low vibration hums through the air. The ground ripples faintly under their bare feet, and a few stumble laughing nervously. Their parents shout for them to come back up the slope. That afternoon the Smith-Olin feels another tremor while hammering a blade. The metal jumps on the anvil, ringing like a struck bell. He frowns, squints toward the mountains, and sees faint dust plumes rising from the cliffs. They look harmless at first, but the shape reminds him of smoke curling back into fire. The coincidence sends a shiver down his spine. Old woman's stories, he mutters and swings the hammer again. A quirky tidbit, according to Scandinavian folklore blacksmiths, were believed to share kinship with the dwarves, creatures said to dwell inside mountains, forging weapons for gods and giants alike. It was considered bad luck to work iron when the earth rumbled, lest you offend those subterranean craftsmen. Some smiths even placed bread on their anvils as offerings to appease the unseen. Whether Olin knew those stories or ignored them, no one can say, but he did glance once at his loaf on the shelf and decide to break it in half. By dusk, a restless energy grips the village. Dogs bark at nothing. Chickens refuse their coops, and the air hums faintly like taut wire. Inga sits beside the central fire again, her eyes fixed on the smoke. This time it rises upward, but the colour has changed. It isn't grey anymore, it's pale green. Historians and chemists suggest such hues could appear when sulphur gases mix with wood smoke, an early warning of gas seepage from underground. To Inga, it is the breath of the underworld itself. She begins to chant, voice low and rhythmic, reciting old verses meant to calm land spirits. The villagers gather around, half curious, half frightened. The flickering firelight paints their faces gold and shadow. Her voice wavers but holds steady. Let the ground keep its peace, let no hunger wake below. For a while it seems to work. The smoke steadies. The tremors stop. Someone exhales a shaky laugh. But then a noise rolls from beneath the fjord, a deep slow groan like stone bending. It's so low it rattles through their bones rather than their ears. The dogs bolt toward the hills. The chickens scatter. Inga rises, staring toward the water. It is not done, she whispers. The hunger is only sleeping. She turns to the crowd and tells them to keep their children indoors, to tie charms above the doors, to leave food on the thresholds. Her hands tremble as she works a small pouch of herbs and bones into the earth near the hearth. If the ground takes, she murmurs, it will take what we feed it first. As night falls again, the fog returns thicker than before. Torches hiss and sputter in the damp air. Somewhere in the distance a low thunder rolls not from the sky but from below, and in the longhouse, as the villagers try to sleep, their dreams fill with the same image, a vast mouth opening beneath them, rimmed with fire sighing softly before the swallow. Evening comes draped in orange mist. The fjord glows like molten bronze as the last light spills across the water. The air tastes of wood smoke, roasted meat, and the faint metallic tang that clings to everything lately. But tonight the villagers of Ligura choose to ignore the strange scent and the uneasy silence that lingers under it. After all harvest is done, the storehouses are full, and winter is creeping close. What better time to feast, laugh, and forget that the ground has been humming underfoot? They gather in the great longhouse, a hall of oak beams darkened by decades of smoke, its roof hung with drying herbs and fish. The fire crackles at the centre, glowing bright enough to chase shadows into the rafters. Platters of salted herring, smoked lamb and bread, thick with butter, pass from hand to hand. Mead flows, freely golden and thick, poured from barrels that smell of honey and oak. Someone starts a song, an old sea chant that rises and falls like waves, and soon the entire hall is clapping in rhythm, stomping their boots on the packed earth floor. The sound echoes deep, and for a fleeting moment it feels like life itself is beating back whatever waits outside. A mainstream historical fact about Viking life fits perfectly here. Communal feasting wasn't just for celebration, it was sacred duty. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia have uncovered longhouses with oversized hearths and benches built for dozens, suggesting entire communities gathered regularly to strengthen bonds through shared food, mead and story. These gatherings weren't only social, they were spiritual. Eating and drinking together reaffirmed the unity between humans, gods and land. If the earth was uneasy, the Vikings would often feast to remind it that they belonged. Still superstition clings to every mouthful tonight. Inga the seer sits near the fire, sipping her mead in silence. Her eyes keep drifting toward the hearth, where smoke still refuses to rise straight. It swirls sideways instead, curling toward the floor like a cat seeking warmth. She says nothing, but her fingers trace runes in spilled ale, an old charm against shifting ground. Across the table Olan the smith notices and mutters, "Even the old gods need a drink before they do their work." A few nearby chuckle, but the laugh dies quickly when the bench creaks beneath them just a little too sharply, as though something below shifted. Outside, the fog presses against the windows like a living thing. Beyond it, faint tremors ripple through the ground just enough to make loose dishes clink together. The goats bleat uneasily in their pens. No one hears them over the noise of the hall, over the clash of mugs and the laughter of men half drunk on mead. By the door, children chase one another, waving small carved figurines. One of them, a boy named Einar, drops his toy on the ground. When he bends to pick it up, the packed earth feels strange beneath his palm, soft and warm, almost like bread dough. He frowns and presses his hand again, and this time he swears the floor moves a slow pulse, a faint give and take. He tells his mother, who only laughs. "The gods are dancing with us tonight, little one. Be glad they join in." A quirky tidbit from Scandinavian folk tradition might make that line more literal than she knows. Some Norse communities believed that beneath every settlement lived Landvatir guardian spirits bound to the soil itself. If angered or disturbed, these beings could shift the ground, cause floods, or sink whole farms. Farmers would pour ale into the earth to appease them during feasts, a quiet ritual between laughter and song. Archaeologists have even found small drinking horns buried near hearths, evidence of offerings made mid-celebration. So perhaps when Einar's mother laughs, she's not dismissing the story at all, just playing along with an old habit of pretending fear is gratitude. Inside, the songs grow louder. Arvid the fisherman stands on a bench mug raised, recounting how he once fought off a sea serpent near the Shetlands, a claim everyone knows is nonsense, but they cheer anyway. It was as long as 3 boats, he insists, wobbling slightly. And uglier than Olin's mother. The crowd roars with laughter. Even Olan joins in banging his cup on the table. The sound echoes oddly, the vibration lingering longer than it should. Someone jokes that the hall is laughing too. Then a faint pop, small sharp like a stick snapping, cuts through the noise. For a heartbeat everyone freezes. The sound came from under the floor. Then another pop 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 followed by a low groan. The timbers shudder. Dust sifts down from the rafters, sparkling in the firelight. "It's the frost," says Thorgeir, the eldest, raising a calming hand. The ground's just shifting for winter. No one believes him, but they nod anyway. The feast continues. The tremors fade, replaced by a softer sound, a slow bubbling like water boiling deep underground. It's faint, steady, almost rhythmic. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Inga hears it clearly. She sets down her cup and leans close to the fire, listening. Beneath the music, beneath the laughter, she catches another sound breathing. Not human, not animal. Deep drawn-out breaths echoing through the ground itself. "Enough," she murmurs, pushing to her feet. The hall quiets. Her voice is small, but carries like smoke. The land is waking. The villagers exchange uneasy glances. Arvid rolls his shoulders, pretending to shake off the tension. "Then let it wake with us," he says, grinning too wide. "Pour another round." The crowd cheers weakly. But when Olan reaches for the mead jug, the liquid inside ripples, though his hand hasn't touched it. The vibration runs through the table, through the floor, through every bench and cup. Outside, a cow bellows, long and desperate. Then comes a muffled thud, followed by another closer this time. The earth trembles. The laughter dies. Everyone in the hall feels it now, the shifting, the pull, the sense that the world beneath them is turning to liquid. Children cry. Torches flicker. Someone shouts for the gods, another for silence. Historians still debate whether such rapid collapses could truly happen without warning. Some geologists argue that liquefied soil can indeed fail in seconds, triggered by groundwater pressure volcanic gas, or sudden vibrations. Others believe the old stories exaggerate, layering myth over minor landslides. But whatever the truth, the experience must have felt like standing on a drumhead seconds before it splits. The ground steadies again. The villagers sit frozen eyes wide, listening for the next tremor. For a long, awful minute, nothing happens. Then the wind returns, carrying a scent of sulphur and salt sharp enough to sting. Someone whispers, "The sea's coming for us." Inga moves to the doorway, staring into the fog. "Not the sea," she says softly. "The world below it." Behind her the fire flickers once, then burns blue. No one laughs anymore. The night grows heavy and strange. The blue flame in the hearth steadies tall and silent, casting thin shadows that seem to breathe. The villagers of Ligra stand crowded in the longhouse, too afraid to move, too proud to show it. The air hums faintly as though the entire valley is waiting for something to happen. Then from somewhere deep beneath the soil, a low sound begins a sigh, vast and slow, as if the world itself has just woken and is disappointed by what it finds. It starts with a single vibration, barely noticeable. Tankards tremble. A bowl of stew slides across the table. The children cling to their mothers, silent now, their earlier laughter replaced by wide-eyed fear. Olan the blacksmith feels the hammer at his belt shift on its own, tugged downward by some invisible weight. "That's no frost," he says, his voice dry. "That's breath." Outside, the goats panic. Their cries pierce the fog like alarms echoing off the mountainsides. A few men rush to calm them, stepping into the mist, but the air feels wrong, warmer than before, thick with moisture that smells faintly of ash and iron. Their boots sink deeper than they should into the soil. It's as if the ground is exhaling around them, softening with every step. "She's breathing," whispers one of the younger men, glancing back toward the safety of the longhouse. A mainstream geological fact fits this eerie picture perfectly. Norway's western coast is riddled with deposits of marine clay left by ancient glaciers. When saturated by water, this clay can liquefy under sudden pressure, turning solid land into flowing mud almost instantly. Entire hillsides have collapsed this way even in modern times. One recorded slide near Verdalen in the 19th century swallowed 40 farms in seconds. The locals then called it the sighing earth. It's a term that feels too poetic to be coincidence. Back inside, Inga kneels before the hearth. The blue flame dances without smoke, its core pulsing faintly, as if sinking to the rumbling beneath them. "It is awake," she murmurs. Her voice barely carries, yet everyone hears it. The spirit of the land. She remembers her hunger. The villagers exchange uneasy looks. One man scoffs under his breath, but his laugh sounds hollow. Arvid the fisherman shakes his head. "Then we give her food and send her back to sleep," he says, half joking. He tosses a piece of bread into the fire, a harmless old custom meant to appease restless gods. The bread burns, curling into ash. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the flame surges, turning white hot. A sharp crack splits the floorboards under Arvid's feet. He leaps back as a fine line of steam hisses upward through the gap. "Get outside," Olan shouts. The hall erupts into motion benches, overturning children, crying dogs barking from somewhere in the mist. Inga stays kneeling, eyes closed, whispering a prayer older than the language around her. When two men try to pull her away, she slaps their hands and snarls, "Not yet. If you run too soon, it will follow." They hesitate, torn between faith and fear. A quirky tidbit, some early Norse charms were built on paradox, doing the opposite of what instinct demanded. When a storm threatened, you didn't hide. You walked toward the thunder. When the earth trembled, you stood still. The idea was to show courage, to convince the forces of nature that you were kin, not prey. It's easy to see why these beliefs took root. In a world without science, defiance itself became a kind of dialogue with the unknown. But nature isn't swayed by courage. The next tremor is stronger, rolling through the village like distant thunder underfoot. Roof beams groan. A shelf of pottery crashes to the floor, shattering. Inga's candle topples, spilling wax across her lap. She doesn't flinch. Outside, the goats bleat again, then suddenly stop. The silence afterward is worse than the noise. The villagers stumble into the open air. The fog feels thicker now, pressing close against their faces, damp and electric. Each breath carries the taste of metal and sulphur. The ground underfoot feels soft, elastic, faintly warm. Thorgeir the Elder kneels and presses his palm to the soil. "The clay is turning," he says quietly, like water trapped under skin. He looks up at the others, his eyes wide. It'll fall in on itself. Historians still debate how much early Norse settlements understood about such dangers. Some evidence suggests they recognized certain warning signs: boiling springs, sagging earth, strange animal behavior. A handful of saga fragments even describe villages taken in their sleep by the sea below. Whether these tales record actual landslides or serve as metaphors for moral decline remains uncertain. But standing there in the fog that breathes the villagers of Ligra have no need for debate. The sigh comes again louder now, a deep wet sound like the inhalation of a giant. The air shivers. From the direction of the fjord comes a faint splash, followed by the slumping rumble of something heavy moving under the surface. The villagers turn toward it instinctively. Torches flare, casting rings of gold through the mist. For an instant they glimpse the shoreline and then lose it, as the fog thickens again, rising like steam from a boiling pot. Olin grabs Inga by the arm. "We go now," he growls. She doesn't resist this time. Together they lead the people uphill toward the ridge path that winds between the pines. Children cry for their pets. Someone screams for a missing brother. The path trembles under their boots, small stones rolling downhill ahead of them. Every few steps the earth seems to breathe again, inhale, exhale, inhale. It's hypnotic, almost rhythmic, as if following a heart that belongs to something ancient and immense. Halfway up the slope the sigh turns into a moan. The sound rises in pitch deep and grinding until it becomes a roar. A section of hillside collapses behind them, swallowing fences, sheds, and the outermost huts. The noise is indescribable, 1,000 drums and thunderclaps rolled into one. A rush of wind follows, pulling at their clothes. For a heartbeat the entire world feels like it's falling. Then stillness, brief terrifying stillness. The villagers turn back gasping. Where the lower half of the settlement once stood, there's only fog and a yawning black pit. The longhouse roof sticks out for a moment like a raft sinking into a whirlpool, then vanishes beneath a slow-churning river of mud and water. The fire inside burns a moment longer before being snuffed out with a hiss. Somewhere behind the survivors, Inga whispers, "It's begun." Above them, thunder cracks across a clear sky, loud, sharp, impossible. The sound rolls down the fjord, bouncing between cliffs. When it fades, the only thing left is the echo of that sigh, long, deep and final. The earth exhales one last time and the heart of Ligra stops beating. Dawn should bring relief. Instead, it brings the end. The eastern sky bleeds red over the fjord, staining the fog like thin paint on milk. The survivors, what few of them have made it to the ridge, stand shivering in silence, staring down at the hollow where their village used to be. The air smells of clay ash and something faintly sweet like burnt honey. The ground beneath them hums again, a deep pulse that travels through their boots and into their bones. Then, just as the sun's first rim lifts above the horizon, the earth gives way. The slope below collapses in a single slow motion. It doesn't shatter or crack like rocket flows. The land moves as though it's alive, a great wave of soil and stone surging inward. The sound is monstrous, the groan of bending wood, the shriek of tearing roots, the wet roar of earth liquefying. The longhouse, half buried already, is swallowed completely. Roof beams vanish beneath a smooth, rippling surface that gleams wetly in the morning light. It takes less than a minute. Where once there was a village, there is now only a lake of mud. A mainstream geological fact supports the horror perfectly. Scientists call this phenomenon quick clay landslide unique to northern Europe. When pressure and moisture combine just right, the clay loses its structure and transforms from solid to fluid, almost instantly turning entire hillsides into rivers of moving earth. The quick clay can flow faster than a galloping horse, and when it stops, it solidifies again, entombing whatever it swallowed. Archaeological digs in Norway and Sweden have uncovered whole farmsteads preserved this way, timbers, tools, even footprints frozen mid-step. The villagers who fled to the ridge can only watch. Their shouts are useless over the sound of the collapse. A barn slides in next to walls folding like parchment. Then the shoreline caves and the sea rushes inward, hissing and foaming as salt water meets clay. Steam rises, mixing with fog until sky and earth are indistinguishable. The entire valley becomes a grey cauldron of mist water and debris. Among the onlookers, Inga stands motionless. Her face is streaked with soot, her eyes reflecting the chaos below like mirrors. "The land has eaten," she murmurs. "It will rest now." No one answers. They're too busy counting the missing wives, brothers, children names that vanish one by one into the thickening silence. Arvid, the fisherman, refuses to accept it. He runs down the slope despite the mud's slow churn. The others call after him, but he doesn't stop. His boots sink ankle-deep, then knee-deep, but he pushes on, wading toward where the longhouse used to stand. Einar, he shouts the name of his son, the boy who played with the carved figurine. The only answer is a faint gloop of rising bubbles, then silence. Suddenly, the ground beneath him ripples. The clay around his legs tightens, sucking him down. Panic flashes across his face as he tries to pull free, but each movement drags him deeper. By the time Erland reaches the edge with a branch to pull him out, Arvid's chest has vanished into the mire. He locks eyes with the blacksmith just for a second, and then he's gone swallowed with a sound like a candle being snuffed. Historians still argue whether such detailed eyewitness accounts, preserved in sagas, are literal or stylized. Some insist they're embellished by poets describing gods and monsters instead of mud and physics. Yet as one scholar notes, every myth begins in something someone once saw and could not explain. The collapse of Ligra, whether natural or supernatural, left an imprint deep enough to echo across centuries. Back on the ridge, the survivors huddle together, stunned. Children cry softly, clutching at their mother's skirts. A baby wails until its voice breaks. Even the animals have gone quiet, no birds, no dogs, no insects. Just the faint wet settling of the valley below. The mist lifts for a moment, revealing what's left. The fjord has changed shape entirely. The shoreline is gone, replaced by a glistening hollow, smooth and pale. In the middle, the water shimmers with strange colours, oily blues and greens that shift as the light changes. It almost looks alive. The sea's come to claim its own mutters, Thorgeir. But Inga shakes her head. Not the sea, she says softly. Something deeper. A quirky tidbit surfaces in later folklore from this region. Villagers who disappeared into the hungry ground were said to live on below building halls of mud and fire where they feasted with the earth spirits. Farmers claimed to hear their songs on windless nights, a low hum beneath the soil that made crops grow faster the next spring. Modern folklorists believe these stories helped survivors cope with the trauma of sudden loss, turning tragedy into continuity. But for the people standing on that ridge, no such comfort exists yet. Olin throws down his branch, his hands shaking. "We leave," he says, "now, before it comes higher." A few nod. Others stare blankly at the ruins below, unwilling to believe it's over. But the ground quivers again just once, a soft aftershock that ripples through the clay lake like the exhale of something falling back asleep. That's enough. They turn and climb higher into the hills. By midday the fog has cleared entirely. Sunlight spills across a landscape remade in hours. Birds begin to circle cautiously overhead. The fjord glitters calm again, almost peaceful. From a distance no one would guess a village ever stood there. Only a faint smell of burnt resin and salt lingers. Geologists centuries later would marvel at how quickly nature can erase itself. But the villagers who live through it don't marvel, they grieve. Inga gathers them by a fallen pine and draws a circle of ash on the ground. "No burial," she says quietly, "but we give them names still." One by one the survivors speak the names aloud: Einar, Signe, Olaf, Freda, Hakon, Arvid. The list grows until voices tremble and fall silent. When the last name fades, Inga drops her handful of ash into the wind. The smoke curls upward this time, not downward. It rises clean into the bright sky, breaking apart like breath disappearing into morning. For the first time in days, Inga smiles. "It's done," she whispers. But as the group begins to move toward the forest, the youngest child, barely 5, stops and looks back. The child tilts their head, listening. "Do you hear it?" they ask softly. The others pause. Down in the hollow, something moves just once. A slow ripple across the new-formed pond, then a sound, deep rhythmic faint as memory, like boots marching underground. The next morning the silence settles like a burial shroud. It's the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that presses against the skin, making even breathing feel like a disturbance. The surviving villagers of Ligra linger in the hills above the sunken valley, half believing that sound itself might wake the thing sleeping below. Even the wind moves carefully, whispering through the pines as if reluctant to intrude. Down in the hollow the mud has hardened into a smooth grey plain. It gleams faintly under the pale sun as though frozen mid-breath. No smoke rises, no bird lands. It's as if the ground has forgotten how to be earth. Inga the seer stands at the edge, wrapped in her fur cloak now dusted with ash. Her silver hair moves in the faint breeze. "It's listening," she says at last. Olan beside her spits into the dirt. "Then let it hear nothing," he mutters. He wants to leave, wants to find new soil, new timber, anything that doesn't hum beneath his boots. But part of him can't look away. The valley below is hypnotic in its stillness. A mainstream historical fact ties eerily to their situation in post-collapse Viking settlements, such as those found at Trøndelag, and Jæren archaeologists often discover sudden abandonment layers. Whole villages appear to have been deserted overnight, with personal belongings left behind and no sign of war or fire. Scholars suggest floods, landslides, or soil failure drove the evacuations. Others whisper of curses. In the Norse worldview, land that spoke back was never trusted again. The villagers sit in small groups on the slope wrapped in cloaks. No one speaks much. The children draw in the dirt tracing spirals without realizing it. The pattern appears again and again, swirls loops, the same shapes that mark the shield and the valley floor. When Inga notices, she gently wipes the drawings away, though she says nothing. Food is scarce. Smokehouse stores are gone, buried beneath the clay. They live on what little dried fish and bread they carried during the flight. The water from the stream tastes faintly of metal, and each mouthful leaves the tongue tingling. It's poisoned, mutters Thorgeir, but Inga shakes her head. No, she says. It remembers. At night the silence deepens further. The stars look brighter here, untroubled by fire or smoke. The survivors huddle together, their campfire burning small, afraid to feed it too much wood, as if the land might mistake warmth for arrogance. Somewhere in the darkness an owl calls and everyone flinches. Even the smallest sound feels amplified. A quirky tidbit from Norse belief fits this mood of haunted quiet. It was said that after a great calamity the world paused to listen for the god's next move. Farmers called these pauses Jordsøvn, the earth's sleep. During Jordsøvn no one was to shout, hammer or sing, for fear of waking what had been buried. Some families went as far as binding their animals' bells in cloth, muting them until spring. The villagers of Ligra, though unaware of this specific term, live it instinctively now. Every word feels like an intrusion. Days pass. The fog returns low and thin, curling through the pines. No one ventures close to the hollow anymore. The children ask when they'll go home and no one answers. At dusk a reddish light sometimes flickers over the valley floor, not fire, not reflection, but something that glows and fades like breathing. Historians have long debated how such luminous myths emerge after disasters. Some suggest geological causes, bioluminescent gases decaying matter, releasing phosphine or methane that ignites faintly in oxygen. Others see psychological residue grief projected into the landscape imagination, filling silence with meaning. Yet in cases like this, both may be true. The mind and the earth mirror one another, each processing trauma in its own strange rhythm. On the fourth night, Olin dreams of hammers striking from beneath the soil. He wakes sweating, certain he heard metal ringing underfoot. He walks to the ridge torch in hand and listens. The sound doesn't return. Only the faint hum remains the same deep, endless vibration like distant thunder trapped below. He's not alone. Inga stands a few paces away watching the valley. You feel it too, she says without turning. Olin nods. It's still breathing, he murmurs. She sighs. Then we wait until it stops. But the earth doesn't stop. At dawn, mist clings thick again, so dense that it seems to muffle time itself. The villagers wake to find the ground beneath their camp faintly warm, as though heat rises from deep below. The stream runs slower, heavier. Even the birds remain silent. That day they move farther uphill into the birch forest. The path is narrow, their steps heavy. Behind them the valley disappears completely into fog, leaving no visible edge. It's as if it has erased itself from the world. Only when night falls again do they stop. Around the fire, Thorgeir tries to lighten the mood. Maybe the gods got tired of us and took the land back, he says. Could have been worse. Could have left the taxes. A few weak laughs ripple through the group. It's the first sound of humour in days. Even Inga smiles faintly, but her eyes remain distant, fixed on the horizon where the mist swells like a living sea. Later that night the silence fractures. It begins with a faint tapping, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. The sound comes not from the trees or wind, but from below. The ground answers itself in gentle pulses, spaced like footsteps. 1 pause, 2 pause, 3, then stillness. The survivors freeze. Just the earth settling, Olin whispers, but even he doesn't believe it. The tapping resumes closer now, faint but clear. It continues for nearly a minute, then fades again. When it stops, no one breathes for a long time. Then Inga speaks softly, almost tenderly. They're still walking. The group stares at her. Who asks Thorgeir, the ones who didn't climb? The fire cracks once loud in the quiet. Sparks leap upwards, swirling into the night. The villagers huddle closer together, listening. The silence returns heavier than before, dense and absolute. Somewhere in that endless hush, it feels like the land exhales, again soft, patient and endless. By the time the next season comes, Ligra is only a story whispered by the survivors. They've built a small settlement farther inland, timid huts clustered beside a crooked stream roofs, patched with whatever reeds and driftwood they could salvage. The new village doesn't have a name yet. No one dares to speak the old one aloud. It's as though the syllables themselves are cursed, capable of pulling the past back through the soil. Yet the story refuses to die. It clings to them like soot. Children whisper it by the fire at night, shaping the silence into a monster they can name. The land opened its mouth, they say, and the people fell in. Their parents hush them, but the children giggle nervously and add more details each time voices in the fog fire beneath the ground a queen with silver hair leading men into the earth. By winter, every version of the tale contradicts the last. Memory has already begun its slow transformation into myth. The elders meet at dusk one evening, huddled in a hut, still smelling faintly of wet clay. They speak quietly, afraid to attract attention from whatever gods or spirits might still be listening. Thorgeir argues that the event must be recorded. If we forget, he says it will happen again. The next ones must know. Olin shakes his head. And if writing it makes them look for it, some doors stay shut for a reason. Inga listens without speaking. Her eyes are distant, reflecting the flickering firelight. When the others finally turn to her, she says, "We cannot silence what the land remembers. So we write, but not to warn, to release." And so the first version of the saga of the Earth's breath is born. A mainstream historical fact adds credibility to this quiet act of desperation. Early Norse settlements often relied on oral storytelling, long before writing spread across Scandinavia. The few who knew letters, mostly monks or travellers who had seen Latin script, used them sparingly, often blending Christian phrasing with pagan imagery. Some surviving fragments from western Norway indeed mention lands that fell inward, or valleys that swallowed men at dawn. Whether those refer to this event or others like it, no one can say. Inga gathers soot from the hearth and mixes it with animal fat, creating a crude ink. She writes with a sharpened birch twig on dried strips of calf skin, the same materials monks along the coast use for their chronicles. Her handwriting is uneven but deliberate. Each line begins with a prayer, ends with a question. The ground moved, she writes, because something beneath remembered its hunger. The survivors watch as she writes, murmuring blessings. A quirky tidbit hides in her method. Viking women sometimes recorded runes on fabric or bone as protective charms, but Inga's inked parchment is an anomaly. Later scholars would argue whether her fragment counts as scripture spell or early science. The line between them as ever blurs in the firelight. When the writing is done, Inga burns half the pages. The ashes drift upward, mingling with snowflakes. So the words go where the land cannot reach them, she says. The rest she hides beneath a stone near the new settlement's boundary, marking the spot with a circle of small pebbles. Centuries later, archaeologists will find charred fragments near that very region, scraps of vellum etched in a mix of runes and Latin, referencing a valley that glowed and sighed. The ink analysis shows traces of soot iron and animal fat consistent with 9th century materials. Historians still argue over their origin. Some label them monastic copies of lost sagas. Others suspect local pagan accounts transcribed in secret. None agree, but all admit the handwriting seems feminine. Back in the fledgling village, life resumes its fragile rhythm. Men cut timber, women weave, children chase each other through frost-silvered fields. The survivors of Ligra rarely speak of the collapse anymore, but they act differently. Every home is built on stone, not clay. Every doorway faces east. And every year, when fog rolls thick over the valley below, they light a single fire and let it burn out on its own. No prayers, no songs, just smoke rising into dawn. One morning, a monk travelling from Lindisfarne stops at their settlement seeking shelter. His robe is tattered, his Latin strange, and soft with Irish inflection. Over supper, he listens to their story. When Inga finishes, he crosses himself and says, "There are places where God's hand still touches the earth." Best not to ask what it meant to do. The monk stays the night, then departs before sunrise. Months later, another traveller arrives, a scribe claiming he heard of a miracle valley where the ground itself breathed. He takes notes in the margin of his journal, promising to carry the tale to the abbeys. The villagers don't stop him. They've already learned that silence breeds more curiosity than speech. As spring returns, the valley below changes again. Grass grows along the rim, but nothing takes root in the centre. The hardened clay still shines faintly after rain, reflecting the sky like a dull mirror. The villagers begin calling it Spielheimer, the mirror home. It becomes taboo to point at it. Those who do are said to lose their way in fog soon after. Historians centuries later will debate whether the saga of the Earth's breath was allegory or documentation. Some propose that the Mirror Valley symbolises human pride communities built too close to unstable ground. Others see it as proto-science, a poetic attempt to explain natural disaster through observation rather than fear. A third camp insists it was both a living fusion of myth and geology, where story preserved what data could not. For Inga, none of that matters. One evening, she walks alone to the ridge overlooking Spegheim. The fog glows faintly, as it often does. She carries a small pouch of ash, the remnants of her burned pages. Kneeling, she scatters it to the wind. The grey dust drifts outward, then downward, dissolving into the mist that hides the hollow. Words are lighter than earth, she whispers. Let them rise. Behind her the sun sinks low, the world turning gold and blue. For a moment the silence breaks not with sound, but with memory. The faintest echo of boots, distant and slow, walking deeper into the horizon. Inga closes her eyes and smiles. Still marching, she murmurs, and for the first time since the collapse her heart feels quiet. Beneath the peat and stone the earth has kept its secrets with the patience of a god. Centuries of rain and frost have pressed the land flat, sealing everything in silence. But silence, as the Old Norse knew, is never empty, it hums. And one day, long after the last skald's song about Lygra fades, the earth hums loud enough for humans to hear again. It begins in the late summer of 1894 when a peat cutter named Jens Halvorsen drives his spade into something solid. The marsh is supposed to be all roots and mud, but his blade hits wood, then metal, then something that hums faintly through the handle. He jerks back, thinking it's just a buried tool. But as he scrapes away the peat, a circular object emerges, a shield, its surface blackened but gleaming faintly blue where sunlight touches it. Around the rim runs a strange spiral pattern. The villagers gather quickly. A few think it's a church relic. Others whisper that it belongs to those who sank. Jens's grandmother mutters a prayer under her breath and refuses to look at it directly. The air around the object smells sharp metallic, almost like burnt wool. When the local pastor arrives, he touches it with a stick instead of his hand. The stick tip smoulders. That night no one in the village sleeps well. Village. A mainstream historical fact anchors this eerie find. Scandinavia's bogs are renowned for preserving ancient relics. Archaeologists have recovered bodies so well preserved that skin still bears tattoos and weapons so intact they could be mistaken for modern reproductions. These finds often come with strange discolorations from the minerals in peat and the tannins of decaying moss. But what Jens finds doesn't rust or rot. It glows faintly in darkness, a soft pulse like a dying ember. A quirky tidbit circulates among the townsfolk. They start saying the shield breathes. When left overnight in a locked barn, frost forms around it in perfect rings as if the air itself is sighing. Cats refuse to go near it. One man claims his hair stood on end for a full minute after standing too close. No one can explain it. The mayor writes to the University of Bergen asking for scholars unafraid of the devil. 2 weeks later, a team of scientists arrives, archaeologists, chemists, and one dour man named Henrik Fosse, a geologist who believes everything in the world has a rational cause if you only dig deep enough. He's wrong, of course, but that's the fun of stories like this. They erect a small tent around the find and begin to excavate. What they uncover changes everything. The shield rests atop something larger, a layer of timber thick as a ship's hull preserved in strange black resin. Beneath that lies a layer of compacted soil studded with bits of bone and pottery. The bones are pale, curled and oddly warped, as if softened by heat before being sealed. The team works carefully, documenting every inch. Then at sunrise on the 4th day, the earth itself trembles. It's a small tremor, just enough to rattle the tools and send ripples through the puddles, but it's followed by a deep, resonant sound not unlike a sigh. Gas pocket, Henrik declares, forcing a laugh. Yet the tremor repeats every few hours. The villagers call it the breath of the valley. Historians later identify this region as one of Norway's quick clay zones, unstable layers of silty sediment that can liquefy without warning when disturbed. Entire farms have vanished that way. But there's a problem. The soil at Lygra is too compact, too mixed with basalt, too old to act like quick clay. Something else is moving below something that refuses to follow geologic logic. At dusk, the scientists lower a brass probe into the peat. It comes back warm. When they test the temperature, it reads 40 degrees Celsius, around 104 degrees Fahrenheit, far too high for the surrounding ground. Residual chemical reaction. Henrik mutters, though his handwriting in the field journal grows unsteady after that. That night, the camp records strange phenomena. The compass spins, metal tools vibrate faintly, and the peat emits a pale blue vapour when disturbed. One assistant collapses from nausea. Another swears she heard distant voices chanting in Old Norse. Henrik dismisses it as superstition, but in the morning he finds shallow depressions around the site, footprints almost human leading into the bog and vanishing mid-step. By the time autumn rain arrives, the excavation halts. The shield is sent to Bergen, where it's placed in a museum under controlled conditions. Tests show vitrification, the fusion of metal and sand, by temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius, around 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. No natural fire could have done it. The conclusion reads, unexplained plasma event, possibly electrical in nature. In the village, the peat cutters go back to their fields pretending life is normal. But sometimes at night a faint hum travels through the soil. It vibrates through bed frames and spoons, through buckets and bones. Dogs howl. Children wake crying. A farmer swears he saw a line of blue lights moving slowly across the moor, like men carrying lanterns under the earth. A quirky modern echo of these events persists. Even in the 21st century, magnetic anomalies are reported near the old excavation site. GPS devices lose signal. Compasses drift upward. Scientists attribute it to iron deposits. Locals, however, say it's because the buried ones still march. In 1927, a small landslide opens a new wound in the valley, revealing more timbers, this time from what appears to be a longhouse perfectly preserved. Inside are tools, pottery shards, and a single iron brooch shaped like a spiral. The museum labels it Norse, circa 9th century, but no one explains why the interior timbers are scorched from within, not without, as if the fire had begun inside the wood itself. Historians continue to argue as historians do. Some call it the oldest evidence of a geothermal disaster in Scandinavia. Others whisper that the shield and the house belong to the same people, the ones who vanished before dawn. A few fringe scholars, braver or more foolish than the rest, suggest that the spirals aren't mere decoration, but maps, coordinates of sound, light and energy, carved into wood to mark where the world once opened. And so, beneath the peat and stone, the mystery endures, layered in mud memory and magnetic whisper. The valley never sleeps. Sometimes when the fog drifts low and the wind stills, hikers claim to hear it again. A faint measured rhythm beneath their boots, too slow for heartbeats, too steady for tremors. If they're wise, they stop and listen. The sound comes from below, as if the buried are still marching, still keeping time with something that hasn't ended. And when lightning flashes far out over the fjord, the peat flashes too blue for an instant, then black again. Just long enough to remind anyone watching that history doesn't disappear. It just buries itself and waits for us to dig. Science arrives as it always does, wearing clean boots and good intentions. But in Ligra, the mud clings differently. Every attempt to measure, record, or explain the valley ends with more questions than answers. The shield hums faintly in its museum case, the peat exhales vapour that sensors can't quite categorise, and every few months a tremor ripples through the earth, too small to notice in the cities but enough to rattle windows along the fjord. The 20th century begins to fold into the 21st, and technology sharpens its gaze. Drones, magnetometers, ground-penetrating radar all descend upon Ligra like metallic ravens. The results are impressive, bewildering, and if you ask the scientists off the record, a little unnerving. Beneath the peat, they find an oval depression, roughly 150 metres, about 492 feet long, and 30 metres, around 98 feet deep, rimmed by layers of magnetised stone. It resembles a crater, but there's no sign of impact. A mainstream scientific fact adds to the intrigue. When lightning strikes quartz or magnetite-rich rock, it can create remnant magnetic fields that last thousands of years. Usually these occur as narrow lines or patches, not perfect spirals. But in Ligra, the magnetized rings form an almost geometric pattern, 5 concentric loops of differing intensity. It's as if the ground itself were a record storing a song that plays only to instruments sensitive enough to hear it. The geologists call this phenomenon paleomagnetic anomaly clustering. The folklorists, less encumbered by jargon, call it the valley's pulse. Still, science persists. The team from the University of Bergen builds a model suggesting that a massive methane pocket once formed beneath the settlement ignited by lightning or friction and caused a liquefaction collapse. This theory neatly ties together the melted glass, the preserved artifacts, and the tales of fire from below. It even explains the humming gas still escaping through microscopic fractures in the bedrock. It would be a satisfying answer if only the evidence weren't so rude. When researchers test air samples from those microfractures, they find no methane at all. Instead, they detect elevated levels of ozone and charged particles, the same kind produced by electrical discharge. Residual static, the physicists mutter, but their instruments keep malfunctioning. Batteries drain within hours, laptops freeze, cameras record phantom flashes of light that appear in no other footage. At one point, an entire generator stops dead during a lightning storm, then restarts itself without human touch. Superstition returns politely at first. The locals who've watched each generation of experts arrive and leave with identical confusion shake their heads. "You can't study the gods," an elderly woman named Astrid Jonsdottir tells a journalist. "They studied themselves long before you were born." She claims her great-grandmother used to hum to the soil when she passed the valley. 3 low notes repeated twice to let the sleepers know you're friendly. The journalist laughs in the article, but the recording of the interview has a faint echo beneath her words, like someone humming back. A quirky tidbit emerges from local lore during the coldest winters. People swear that frost patterns on windows form tiny spirals. Children are told to draw a line through the spiral with their finger before it finishes forming, otherwise the ground will remember your name. It's a quaint warning easily dismissed, but even modern school teachers in the region hesitate to mock it aloud. The spiral, after all, is everywhere in the carvings on the ancient shield, the magnetized soil, and even the radar imaging that maps the valley floor. The debate spreads far beyond Norway. Conferences buzz with speculation. Was it a geothermal explosion, a lightning phenomenon, or perhaps a freak magnetic storm triggered by solar activity? NASA researchers weigh in with data about electromagnetic anomalies at high latitudes. A few brave souls propose localized plasma vortices, in other words miniature auroras trapped inside the Earth. Others snicker and ask how such a thing could swallow a village whole. Historians have their own arguments. One camp believes the entire legend, the Earth swallowing a Viking settlement before dawn, is metaphorical and allegory for pride or divine punishment, recorded by frightened monks. Another camp insists that too many physical clues exist to ignore melted artifacts, distorted timbers, even human remains fused to stone. Something one paper concludes happened here that doesn't fit within the ordinary vocabulary of disaster. The arguments grow heated. One particularly dramatic debate at the Nordic Historical Society ends with a geologist hurling a coffee mug at a folklorist. The mug fortunately misses, and instead cracks against a display poster showing, yes, a spiral pattern. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humour, but perhaps the most unsettling finding comes from an unexpected source: acoustics. A sound engineer from Reykjavik named Olafur Christensen visits the site in the early 2000s to record ambient noise for a documentary. He sets up sensitive microphones overnight. The next morning he plays back the audio and hears something faint beneath the wind, slow rhythmic thuds evenly spaced. It's not thunder, not footsteps, but something between the two. The waveform shows a perfect sequence, 4 beats, pause, 4 beats again. He checks the equipment, the cables, the sensors, nothing malfunctioned. Maybe it's just resonance, he says in the interview. Then he adds, almost sheepishly, but it's awfully human. Modern seismologists confirm that the region does experience low-frequency tremors, typically caused by tidal stress in the crust. Yet the pattern is unusual. Instead of random pulses, the valley's vibrations come in repeating sequences, almost musical in regularity. Geological resonance, the papers call it, though even the authors admit the phrase is just elegant confusion. Meanwhile, the shield still sits in its museum case, humming faintly when humidity rises. Tourists touch the glass and feel a static tingle. One child swears she heard a whisper. Still walking, though her parents blame the tour guide's sound effects. It's tempting to dismiss the whole story as the combined fever dream of science and superstition, each amplifying the other until they sound like proof. But when evening fog settles over the fjord, the locals still avoid the valley. They say the air there tastes like iron, and that the mist glows faintly blue when no moon is out. Some even claim the sound of distant boots carries through the fog measured and calm, as if the vanished host still patrols the borders of their own grave. Historians may argue over cause and consequence, but the earth never argues. It only listens. And in Ligra, it listens with the patience of centuries. Whether it's gas, electricity, myth, or memory doesn't matter much anymore. The hum continues constant as breath steady as a heartbeat. The next tremor will come soon. Everyone knows it. And when it does, the question that once haunted monks, farmers, and scientists alike will rise again: did the Vikings sink into the earth, or did the earth rise to meet them? What still stirs below the valley is not quite life and not quite memory. Something between the two, a restless echo looping through stone and silence like a heartbeat that refuses to fade. Tonight the fog returns early. It creeps through the fjord in slow coils, draping over the moss and lichen like a patient ghost. The new generation of researchers from Oslo has set up their camp on the ridge above Ekkerdalen, armed with every instrument science can imagine. Gravimeters, seismographs, electromagnetic sensors calibrated to pick up a butterfly sneezing. Their equipment hums faintly under the weight of the mist. They're here because of the tremors. The valley has been shaking again, small but regular, 3 per night, spaced nearly evenly, each lasting about 7 seconds. Geologists say it's thermal contraction in the bedrock. Folklorists smirk and call it marching time. In the early hours, the first reading spikes. A deep vibration shudders through the soil, raising goosebumps on arms and static on radios. One researcher, a young woman named Linnea, steps to the edge and listens. Beneath the wind, she swears she hears rhythm, a soft, distant cadence like footsteps muffled by snow. She doesn't mention it in her notes. A mainstream geological fact provides context. Norway's crust is still rebounding from the weight of the last ice age. The land literally rises every year by a few millimetres, a fraction of an inch, stretching, groaning and sighing like an old hull repaired too many times. In theory, these micro-shifts could explain the valley's noises. But when Linnea checks the coordinates of each tremor, she sees something impossible. Their epicenters form a perfect spiral, widening outward with each event. The same spiral carved into the ancient shield, the same one burned into timbers found a century earlier. No one mentions that pattern aloud, but they all see it on their screens. As night deepens, clouds thicken until the camp's lights glow in halos. The temperature drops suddenly from 8 degrees Celsius, about 46 degrees Fahrenheit, to nearly freezing. Breath becomes visible, then heavy. Their generator flickers. A low hum rises from the valley, faint but unmistakable. It's too steady to be wind, too broad to be machinery. The team stands still, straining to listen. Then, without warning, every compass needle points straight up. For 6 long seconds, even gravity seems to hesitate. Dust lifts, water ripples upward, hair stands on end. The air flashes blue, then white. A sound like 1,000 drums rolls through the mountains, echoing for miles, and then silence. When the fog clears, nothing appears to have changed. The camp is intact. The instruments, though, tell another story. Magnetic readings have doubled. Temperature has risen by 3 degrees, Celsius 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and faint vibrations continue beneath the soil, rhythmic and slow. Linnea takes one last walk before dawn. She follows the path where the tremor readings converge. The ground feels faintly warm beneath her boots, pulsing like breath. She crouches, presses her palm to the soil, and feels the faintest tap, 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 4 beats. Pause, 4 beats again. It could be seismic resonance, or it could be something waiting. A quirky observation follows her home when she unpacks her field journal. Days later, she notices the pages smell faintly of ozone. Her pen's metal casing, untouched for hours, has darkened to a spiral pattern. She laughs nervously, tells herself it's coincidence, but still leaves the notebook outside overnight. Meanwhile, the village of Ligra keeps its traditions. Children are told not to whistle near the valley. Shepherds still draw a spiral in the mud before leading their flocks across the ridges just to keep the ground friendly. And every year when lightning season begins, locals gather on the cliffs and watch as the mist glows faintly, blue columns of light flickering where the vanished longhouse once stood. Historians continue to debate whether the Viking disaster ever truly happened. Some say it's a myth distorted by time. Others insist the evidence is too physical, too stubborn. The shield, the smelted glass, the magnetic rings, all relics of something beyond ordinary explanation. A few suggest the army of Bjorn Ironcloak never died at all, but was transformed, consumed not by fire, but by force folded into the pulse of the earth itself. They marched into the clouds, one scholar wrote, and the clouds became their graves. Modern technology hasn't solved the riddle, only made it more intricate. Satellite imaging shows faint electromagnetic anomalies matching the valley's outline. Seismic readings fluctuate in repeating intervals, and the hum, the endless low resonance, never ceases. Even skeptics admit that the sound exists. It's the earth adjusting, they say. But the locals answer, it's the earth remembering. In the end, perhaps both are true. At sunset, the valley shines in soft amber light. The moss catches each hue like velvet, and for a brief moment the land looks peaceful, too peaceful. But listen closely and the calm is an illusion. Beneath the quiet, beneath even the bones of mountains, something moves. Not violently, not cruelly, but rhythmically like breath. Some say it's the ghosts of Bjorn's men still climbing their invisible stairway to the sky. Others say it's the planet itself pulsing with old electricity, forever humming the memory of what it consumed. And some in the deepest part of night claim both answers are the same, because in this world where faith and science often quarrel like siblings, the ground beneath us may hold both scripture and circuitry, both gods and geology. The hum of Ligra continues, steady, timeless, indifferent. And if you ever visit that northern fjord standing in the damp twilight while fog curls around your boots, take a breath and listen. The air will vibrate softly in your chest. The echo may sound like wind or thunder, or 1,000 boots walking just beneath your feet. Don't be afraid. It's only history remembering how to breathe. The story fades now softer than mist over still water. The last echoes roll into the distance and the hum of the valley becomes a lullaby, slow, patient, ancient. You can almost imagine the earth itself exhaling, settling into silence, after telling a secret it's carried for 1,000 years. Outside your window the world is quiet too. Maybe you hear rain against glass or the slow creak of wood as your home breathes with the night. Every sound finds its rhythm and every rhythm finds rest. Even the great mysteries, the ones that keep scholars arguing and dreamers awake, soften when the lights go out. They wait just like we do for the next sunrise to draw their outlines again. If the Vikings really did march into the clouds, perhaps they weren't lost, perhaps they simply found a place beyond the reach of storms where sound travels slower and peace lasts longer. Maybe the hum beneath Ligra isn't a warning, but a song that never quite finished. So breathe deeply now. Let the fog of imagination drift where it will. The ground beneath you is steady, the night forgiving the story patient. Somewhere far below or far above, the old drums keep perfect time with your heartbeat. Sleep well, traveller. The earth remembers you kindly.